techniques. That'd be your pepper spray, tasers, that sort of thing. Then lethal force, and then we deal with the situation at that point, right? So our deterrent. If you have a dog with you that's a trained protection dog, first of all, just having them there with you is a deterrent. If somebody sees a semi-intimidating looking dog that's walking in good obedience with you, at the very least, like, that dog's got some training. I don't know if I want to mess with that person. So the deterrence factor that goes into that right off the bat. And then in the situation we just talked about, where somebody's trying to close distance with you, you can say, hey, don't come any closer. You're going to get bit. Do you understand me? And you can put your dog on what we call watch. And that's where they go to the end of the lead and they start showing aggression to the person. So now they see, this person's telling me I'm going to get bit. That dog looks like it's going to bite me. Maybe I don't want to get any closer. And then we can go to less lethal force. So a dog bite is less lethal. It's considered a lower level of force than drawing your pistol and shooting it. So if that person either walks into you, showing where you can articulate, I was being threatened by this person, I told them to stay back, I put my dog on watch, I gave them all these chances to disengage, and then they still kept approaching me and getting closer, then my dog bit them. Okay, so now that's much more reasonable than I drew a pistol to try and keep them from coming any closer. Because in most states, if you draw a pistol, legally, you might as well use it, because if you don't, they're calling it brandishing a firearm, and now you've got a felony, or you use it, and now you got to defend yourself. But in either case, now you're in a legal quandary because I drew my pistol, right? You don't have that same limitation with a dog. And in most states that are generally self-defense friendly, if a dog bites somebody, there's a without cause clause, let's see if I can say that without getting tongue twisted, in the law, which says if it's unprovoked, then it counts against the dog. But if it's provoked, all I have to do is be able to articulate, this person did this thing that provoked the dog bite. It doesn't count against you or the dog. And then let's say this person realizes, hey, that dog looks like it's a threat, but I still want to get in here. I'm going to draw a weapon. I'm going to draw a pistol. I'm going to draw a knife. You see them present a weapon. Now I can immediately go to that highest level of force. I can release the dog. They go in and they start fighting the person. And if the person immediately gives up, okay, great, the threat is over. Or if they start fighting with my dog or continuing to try and close distance with me, now I can fully justify drawing my pistol and dealing with the situation. So having those steps that you can articulate in front of a jury, I went through all these things. I tried to do all these things to try and keep from hurting this person any more than I had to. And they just kept ramping it up. And so the other thing is that, again, we said you can't protect yourself 24/7, right? The dogs are aware all the time, even when you're sleeping, even when they're sleeping. How many people have seen a dog laying on the ground? There's a noise in the distance, and they're immediately like, boom, what's that over there going on, right? They're much more aware than we are of their surroundings, even when they're sleeping. Hypervigilance is also their natural state. So one of the things that happens with soldiers when they come back from conflict is they've been hyper aware while they were there, but they had 12 or 30 or 100 other guys around them that were all participating in what they were doing. So I'm hyper aware, but I've only got, this is my field of fire. So in the military, that's your area of responsibility, right? If there's a bad guy in this area, I engage. The guy beside me, he overlaps me a little bit, but then he's got his own area. The guy on this side has his all the way around. We've got 360 security with our whole unit. Well, then that guy comes home, and all of a sudden he doesn't have any buddies around anymore. And so he's trying to be hyper vigilant. He's trying to pay attention to everything, and he ends up getting adrenal fatigue. And then we end up with all these issues that a lot of veterans deal with. Well, the dogs are hyper vigilant naturally. They're always like that. Their ears are always looking around, listening to different sounds in different areas. If they smell or they sense something, they look up and they pay attention to it. So now what we can do is we can turn most of our attention to the dog, still be generally aware of our surroundings, but if my dog alerts on something, he looks intently, sticks his ears forward and starts paying attention, I want to go, what are you looking at? And then I can look up and I can say, oh yeah, that sketchy guy over there. I see him. We might have to kill him later, but right now, let's leave him alone. And then we move on with what we're doing, right? We'll keep an eye on that guy. He might be sketchy. Maybe he's got some ill intent, but we can't just go punch somebody in the face or shoot them because they look sketchy in Walmart, right? We got to take our steps one at a time. You could take these dogs anywhere you go, and we can talk about the different options on how that works. And then if you really want to ramp your security up, my mentor used to say, 1 dog is protection, 2 dogs are an army, and 3 dogs are unstoppable. So you start adding multiple dogs into your protection, 1 human versus 1 dog. Realistically, if that person's willing to fight, they're intent on what they're doing, and they're somewhat capable, they probably will end up killing the dog. They'll be going to the ER and probably never using their arms the same way again when it's all over. But if you just send your dog and run, and you don't call them away from that threat, and you just leave them there to fight, the realistic expectation is eventually that person will probably defeat that dog. Now, what most people do is they start to panic and then they want to get away and they run, and then they end up being separated apart and everything ends up being okay. But let's be realistic about self-defense situations. If a person's willing to fight a dog and they keep their mind about them when they do it, one person can defeat a dog. But now you have two dogs. As soon as you turn your attention to that dog, this dog's biting you. You turn your attention over here to this dog, the other dog's biting you. He's particularly bad about it. This is my dog Punisher. And when he deploys with our females, Maeve or MDK, as soon as you turn your attention to one of those other two dogs, he's biting you in the ankles. He's trying to pull your leg out from underneath you and take you to the ground. And so you can add that kind of stuff if you decide you want to. Now, what do the dogs bring to the security plan that nothing else can do? The first thing is their senses. So when I first got into this, I was like 24. I was in the Army. I was like, let's do all kinds of awesome stuff. Let's rappel. Let's do deployments out of helicopters, waterborne operations. I was into all that fun stuff. And one of the things we started teaching dogs to do was hunt snipers. And so I would go to sniper competitions all around the country, and we would hunt their snipers who were doing the competition and try and see if we could track them down. And because I'd read about this in Vietnam, the guys doing this. So we'd have them out there actively trying to avoid us, and we'd be trying to develop techniques to actually find them. And what we would do is get into a slightly elevated position, and I would look with my binoculars, but I never found anybody all by myself, but I'd watch my dog. And they'd be relaxing, and everything would be fine, and all of a sudden they go, and as soon as they would indicate, I'm like, okay, like I'm using them as my guidance. I'm like, okay, what are you looking at? And sure enough, every time they would do that, we'd find a team. And then we'd watch them until they hit a landmark. There's a tree over there. Okay, we can identify that tree from a distance, go to that tree. We cast the dog off in a track, and then we would track that team down. So their senses, they have hearing, they have obviously their scent. And, people say everything is based on scent in the dogs. I think they also just have a connection to the world and the environment that we simply don't. People can try and explain it different ways, but they just have access to a world we don't, is how my mentor used to put it. The other thing is dogs are a deterrent. People don't want to get bit by a dog. And most people that are trying to do violent crimes will do some level of recon before they go in. So they're going to watch your house for a couple days, see what your patterns are. Do they have a dog? Do they not? How old are their kids? How many people live here, right? When is people home and when are people not home? And one of the funniest stories we had, when I used to train up in Canada, we would have a classroom. It was like a double wide trailer. There was this big open room. And there was always this table right inside the door that you would walk into the classroom. And I typically, because that was the back of the classroom, I would put my dogs on that table so that all the other people that were coming into the classroom could sit up closer to the instructor. And we trained a lot with special operations guys there. And one day there was a CAG operator, that's Delta Force, and he walked in, and my Malinois was laying on the table sleeping, and he walks in the door, and she looks up at him, and he's like, whoa. And I was like, dude, how many people have you killed? Like at least 35 people, I'm sure. You've killed a lot of people. You've been in the teams for like 10 years. What are you afraid of this dog for? And that dude would look around the room and be like, I could kill everybody in this room. Like that was just the kind of guy he was. But he didn't want to get bit by a dog. We have this natural fear of not wanting to get bit by another predator. They create distraction and damage. So we talked about the idea that you leave one dog with one person, and probably the person will be able to fight with the dog if they're determined enough to do so. But what's happening when that person is having to engage that dog? They're not focused on me, and people will often say things like, well, what if they shoot my dog? Well, if they're shooting at my dog, who are they not shooting at? They're not shooting at me. And if they're shooting at my dog, I can definitely justify drawing a weapon and shooting back. So now I don't have to worry about running to cover necessarily because I'm being shot at. I can actually take a better shot and put that person down, and then the fight is now over. Or if you're at home and your gun is in the bedroom on your dresser and you're watching TV and the door gets kicked in, your dog goes and engages, he's buying you time, he's causing distraction, he's doing damage to the person. That's when I get to run into my room and grab my pistol and run back out and take care of the threat, right? So they're adding all this capability to our situations and our scenarios. And then here's one that a lot of people don't think about, but I dealt with quite a bit as a police officer when I was a sheriff deputy in Hillsborough County. And we would get these calls, and it would be basically, it was called a stalker call, but technically they weren't stalkers. But nighttime, female looks out of her window, hears a noise outside, looks out to check it out. There's a guy in her yard, right? Sometimes the guys are actually trying to look in the windows. Sometimes they're just in the yard trying to approach the house, various different things going on. Well, what do? Of course, they call us. Well, here's a news flash. Those are not high priority calls. If there's a robbery in progress or a burglary or something like that going on, yeah, I'll get to you when I'm done with this over here. And so it could take up to 40 minutes from the time that call comes in to the time you actually show up. Well, what are you doing that whole time? I mean, if you're there by yourself, do you want to go out and check the yard? Some people would say yes. Most people would say, you know what? It's a lot safer in here. Check and make sure all the doors are locked. And if you've got a protection dog in the house and you've got a pistol or a shotgun, now they bring a tremendous amount of comfort and relaxation. It's still stressful. It's still not fun to deal with while you're waiting, but it's a lot harder when you're the only one there all by yourself waiting and you don't know, are they going to try and sneak in a window? Are they going to try and come in the back door or the front door? I don't know. Well, if you have a dog there with you that you know is trained to watch over you, then at the very least you can bring that stress level down and build that companionship in with the dog. Now, one thing that a lot of people in the self-defense community do not talk about is the fight after the fight. And we've mentioned that a little bit with defending yourself against a jury of your peers, but this is something that I think everybody needs to think about. Whenever you make a plan or run a scenario in your head of how am I going to defend myself, one of the questions that needs to happen at the end of every single scenario is, and how would I defend that to a jury of supposedly reasonable people and justify my actions in that situation? Because you could be alive today, but in prison for the next 10 or 12 years, or you could be alive today and not have to deal with prison. So a couple of recommendations I make for that situation is join one of these organizations. There's US Law Shield, USCCA, there's several others that are out there, but basically it's like $200 to $300 a year for your membership. And then if there's a self-defense situation of any kind, you call their number, they immediately contact you to a lawyer 24/7. And when the police show up and they're like, hey, what happened? You need to give us your statement. You're like, I am willing to completely cooperate with you guys. Here's my lawyer. And then your lawyer can do the organization and plan for when you're going to come in and do your interviews and all that kind of stuff. I always tell people, when you've been in a high stress, life and death situation, you think you know what happened, but you do not. And I have a story of a buddy. We call him Machete James. Why do we call him Machete James? Because he was attacked by a guy with a machete. And he was at work, and they were doing work where these guys would come in. They were construction labor workers. So, you know, they either have a specialty in drywalling or roofing or masonry or whatever it was they did. And they would come into this office and they would sign up. And then they would work with construction companies in the area, and they'd say, hey, we need 3 masons today. We need 2 painters and a couple drywallers. And they'd gather those guys together and they'd take them out to the job site. Well, he had just come back from taking some guys out to the job site. He's filling out the whiteboard, you know, everything's normal day. And he hears the door open and close to the back of the office. Doesn't think anything of it because people come in and out of the door sometimes. And then he hears this weird thwack. He turns around, and the girl that's back there with him in the back office is leaning over the desk, and there's a guy standing there with a machete in his hand. And he's like, what the hell am I seeing? And this is where everybody thinks, oh, yeah, like that dude's got so much distance from me. I can draw my pistol. I can shoot him. The problem is your brain doesn't understand what it's seeing in those situations. And James, by the way, was a guy he was a SOAR crew chief. So he'd been in firefights, picking up and dropping off special operations guys all over the world. He'd done some stuff and been there, and he's still going, what the heck am I seeing? Surely that's not a guy with a machete standing in our back office and just whacked my coworker over the head with it. And then the guy looks up at him and charges. He draws his pistol, gets 2 rounds off, hit him in the forearm with one of the rounds. They go on the ground. Pistol goes one direction. Machete goes the other direction. Well, of course, James calls me as soon as this is over and is like, dude, this crazy thing just happened to me. I need to come over and hang out and talk for a little while. Come on over. Here's the story. They hit the ground. Pistol goes one way, machete goes the other way. They're wrestling on the ground for a few minutes. Guy reaches over, picks up his pistol because the guy was on top of him, points the pistol at him, and he's like, well, today's my day. And then girl goes to run out because she got slightly scalped. Apparently this dude sucked at swinging machetes, thankfully for her and James. But she goes running out, crashes over a chair. It draws his attention. He jumps up and chases the girl out of the office. That was the story in James' head. And I mean, he was thinking about this for weeks. And he would try and go through it, and because they were trying to figure out, like, where did the other rounds go, what happened, you know, getting all the details of the story together. And 6 weeks after it happened, he was able to get the footage from the video cameras inside the office. Guy never grabbed the pistol. Never happened. They went to the ground, weapons went both directions, girl ran for her life, crashed over the chair, guy chased her out of the room. But why in his head did that happen? Because in his mind, that was his fear. If I have to draw my pistol and use it, what if it's used against me? And when things happened under that stress level, in his mind, that's the scenario that it created for him. So now he wasn't being investigated for anything in that situation, but if you defended yourself in your home and they're investigating you and you give a story that somehow implicates you as a criminal and not the innocent victim, and then that's going to be used against you later. So you do not want to talk to police immediately after something like that happened. You want to cooperate, but having a lawyer on your side, somebody who can speak for you, is a huge benefit. And I know USCCA and US Law Shield does this. I would confirm with any others, but if you defend yourself with anything, they will come and represent you in the fight after the fight, including dogs, including frying pans or toasters or a knife. It doesn't matter what you use, they will defend you should you need that. So if you decide, okay, yeah, you're kind of convincing me now, I'm thinking a protection dog's a good idea, what do I need to consider and think about? There's basically two different worlds of training in the bite work realm of dogs. There's the sport world, and then there's the actual protection world. The sport world is based on law enforcement and military qualifications before a dog goes onto the street. So then most military dogs up until recently were just law enforcement dogs that worked in the military environment, right? They weren't the special operations dogs and all that kind of stuff. And so basically they had to do some basic tracking, some basic detection, some obedience, and they had to do a bite. Well, police departments learned a long time ago when they deployed dogs on people who could actually fight with a human being, the dog would bite them on the arm, and then they'd go to hit the dog, and they'd release and bite him on the other arm. Well, now they got wounds on both arms. And then they keep fighting him, and they bite him in the calf. And then they keep fighting, and they bite him in the bicep. And every time they bite him, they're ripping and thrashing through the muscle. And by the time the officer gets there and puts handcuffs on this guy, it looked like he just got run through a meat grinder. And then the guy would sue them, and he would win, because look at this guy. He just got ripped up one side and down the other. And law enforcement agencies were like, we don't want to get sued anymore. So here's what we're going to start training our dogs to do. They're going to bite one spot on a person, and they're going to stay there no matter what. And I don't think it's the best way to train dogs, but I understand and appreciate where these law enforcement agencies are coming from. I don't want to get sued. The officer is supposed to be right there with the dog anyway, so the dog creates pain. It's a weight, so the guy can't keep running away too fast. Officer can run up and catch them, put handcuffs on, into the scenario. But when do police dogs get killed every year? It's when the person draws a knife and starts stabbing the dog, and the dog stays locked on because that's what they've been trained to do. And then the dog gets stabbed to death. Well, you're not apprehending people. That's not the situation you're in. If you get attacked by somebody who sees that you have a dog and says, yeah, that's the person I'm going to go attack, the threat of that person is way higher than the threat of what the average law enforcement dog is going to be deployed on. Because remember, they deploy dogs on people who are running away. They don't want to fight. Or people that are hiding. They don't want to fight. Now, they might fight if they had to, but they're telling you by their actions, either running away or hiding, I don't want the fight. I want to run away or hide. And so if somebody approaches you and you have a dog and they're like, yeah, you're the one I'm going to attack, they're a much higher threat than that. And so what we train our dogs to do is we call it retargeting. So if they bite your arm and you go to strike them, they should release that arm and re-engage on another spot. We also do things where, like, I can use a car or a wall or a tree, and if a dog's biting me, I can pin their neck against that object and press in with my leg and actually pass that dog out so that they'll let go of me and I can run away. Well, I don't want my dogs to get trapped in a situation like that, right? So as we're training our dogs, we're always presenting new threats to them and then giving them the opportunity to figure out, how am I going to counter this? And as long as it's an effective way to counter it, then we're like, good to go, and we'll just keep exposing them to it so that they know, don't let myself get trapped between the bad guy and a hard object. If he tries to hit me, reverse and bite the other arm. The other thing that you'll see, and a lot of people, if you've ever dealt with police canines, it's a very common thing. They walk into a room and they're like, everybody stay back. Don't come near the dog. That's because if you come near the dog, it's just going to bite you. Well, that's a hard dog to live with in your family. And if you have a dog in your home and you have kids, and the dog is a threat to your kids, they're kind of defeating the purpose of being there to protect the family, right? So you want to find somebody who's doing a lot of what we call stability. Stability is just, you only bite something if I tell you to, right? Don't put your teeth on anything I didn't tell you to. The only time our dogs are allowed to break obedience, as we put it, is if somebody physically attacks you, they don't need the command. If somebody physically attacks you, they just engage. Other than that, you have to wait until I tell you that it's okay to bite somebody. Then have you guys watched a lot of the videos of officers deploying their dogs on YouTube? And about half or 3/4 of them, the dog goes in and bites, and then the officer comes up to make the apprehension, right? And they're either dragging the dog off the guy, which is still trying to bite, or they use what's called a breaker bar, which is this little piece of metal that has like a thin layer of leather over it, and they shove it in the side of the dog's mouth, and they push it up against the roof of their mouth so they'll let go of the bite. And about 20% of the time they do that, they turn and smash their handler in the hand, right? That kind of stuff happens all the time. Well, you don't want to have to go put hands on a bad guy if you have to use the dog in that situation. Now, I might do that in a particular situation, but I don't want to have to do it. So what I want to be able to do is send my dog in, they bite the bad guy, and then I can recall them to me, and then I can control the situation. If I'm in public in a parking lot at nighttime by myself, maybe controlling the situation is I grab my dog, we run to our car, and we get the heck out of there. But if I'm in my house and this happens, I don't really have anywhere to run. So get on the ground, look the other way, put your hands out to the side. If you move again, you're going to get bit. Do you understand me? Now I can call the cops and keep the situation under control until they come, right? And should he try anything? Well, I've got my dog and I've got my gun, so we can deal with this situation. So we want to make sure that we can recall our dogs back to us. The other thing is, have you ever seen a sport video online where there's multiple attackers on the field? I've never seen it once. There's always one guy wearing the bite suit, and typically they bite, and then what do? They take a weapon, their little stick, and they whack, whack, whack the dog and train the dog, don't release, even if you're being attacked with a weapon, and then they recall the dog. It's just a routine they follow. Now, it looks really impressive, especially when they come in going 90 miles an hour and knock the guy on the ground and all this fun stuff. And it looks great on a video, but how applicable is that to the real world and a real situation? So we want our dogs to be able to retarget if there's multiple threats. If you think there's a threat and you send your dog on that threat, and then the threat's buddy was hiding over here behind another car and he runs up and grabs you, you don't want your dog locked into that threat and not coming to help you, right? In a home invasion scenario, if there's multiple people and a dog engages one of them and somebody else rushes into the house and grabs one of your kids, retarget on that guy. That's the biggest threat right now. And so we want to make sure that whatever training our dogs are getting, we're not just following routines, we're actually teaching the dogs to fight and think through problems and deal with situations that come up. So if you're interested in getting a protection dog, there's basically 3 routes that you can go to get a protection dog. The first route is you buy a puppy and you invest a bunch of time and energy into the puppy, and then you work with a trainer to bring out the protection stuff. And that is way more financially feasible for most people. You just have to have the time to invest. And I recommend using something like Canine Academy, which we created just for training these types of dogs in their obedience. And then you can either work with a local trainer or you can come train with us for 3 to 5 days, and we work on bringing out the protection stuff. The other option is a lot of people are like, well, I already have a dog. Would this dog work good for protection? Well, we can do an evaluation on that dog and say, yes, this dog would do good, or you might want to look at getting another dog. But you've already put time and energy into your dog. So if you have a solid obedience foundation, you can work with a trainer and bring out the protection capabilities of that dog. But if you have more money than you have time, then you can pay somebody to train the dog to be what you need. So you show up, you spend 5 days training with your dog, learning how to handle them, and then you take your dog home and they're pretty much ready to go. So there's pros and cons to every one. But the biggest thing is, do you have the expertise, or can you find the expertise to help you do your obedience training? Do you already have a dog that would be a good match for something like this? Or do you just want a turn signal? Here it is. It's all done for you. It's ready to go home. So my opinion is the protection dog brings security to you that there's no other tool, no other equipment that you can buy, and it will bring you that same level of security, right? They have things that they can just do. Now, I'm not saying don't get the other tools. Cameras, they're great, but cameras have blind spots, right? Floodlights are great, but not everybody's going to worry about floodlights. Your weapons, you should probably have those, but number one, are you going to be willing to use it? And number two, how many guys are there going to be? And are they going to be shooting back at you as well? And the dog just brings this visceral threat, this visceral fear to most people. If they know you have a dog, even if they think they have a weapon, it's like, yeah, but I still don't want to get bit by a dog. And so there's that deterrence factor that comes into that. So I recommend having a protection dog. You can get one from us. I'd love it. We'd sell you one today. But there's other people out there that are doing training. So I try to go through the things that I recommend you have a trainer that will do, so that when you get a dog, they're actually fully capable of defending you. So how did I do on time? Hey, we're only like 30 minutes. We have plenty of time for questions. Are there any questions at this point?
Any questions?
I usually go overtime.
Here we go, right over here.
All right.
Can you tell us the pricing on how, even ballparks of how much each of those would cost?
Sure. So our 3 to 5 day training sections, if you either want to get a puppy or start with a dog you already have, we typically charge $1,500 for 3 days of training, $2,000 for 5 days of training. At the event, we do have sales on those. So if you know you want to do something like that, come talk to us. We'll get you signed up at the lower prices. Our puppies start at $3,000 at the event right now. There are 2 if you do a contract while you're here, but $2,500 to $3,000 is pretty standard for a dog that's been bred to do this work. And then the protection dogs, and this is pretty much across the industry standard, you're looking between $30,000 and $75,000. So our baseline protection dogs are $30,000. Our middle dogs, which are the ones we typically recommend if you want a dog like it's ready to go right now. And then if you want the really, really high-end dogs, those are about $75,000. Yeah, now most people do a deposit, and then they pay over anywhere between 6 and 18 months to finish paying off the rest of the dog. So as far as I know, we're one of the few that do a payment plan. Yes.
Hi, I have a question. Well, several parts, but so as former law enforcement and escalation.
Yep.
So if you have a stalker, a peeping Tom,
Yep.
and you let your dog out, trained versus untrained, is
Yep.
that a liability issue? I mean, the right thing to do is you let your dog out and you get the
Yeah, that'll really depend on your environment, right? So if you're in a neighborhood, and depending on how late it is, and could there be kids on the street walking around or people out walking their dogs? Yeah, if you know it's your property, the question is, do you want to go out there by yourself or just send the dog? Now, if you're going to send your dog out to protect your property, you need to do something called perimeter training for that dog. So they know where the edges of the yard are, and they know I only check this area. This is the area I'm concerned about. I'm not going to go into the neighbor's yard and kill their cat or something like that, right? So we want to make sure that they're perimeter trained if we're going to do that. Now, there's pros and cons to that, right? I'm very much into there's no one size fits all solution in these situations. So if I send my dog out by themselves and something bad happens to them while they're out there, now that tool is down and it's not here with me to protect me, right? If we're together and something happens, we can at least back each other up. If somebody starts to shoot at my dog, for instance, well, now I see a muzzle flash. I know there's a threat. Even if they hit my dog, I can start shooting back immediately, and then we can take the dog to the vet and we can deal with the situation afterwards, right? So there, you can definitely do that kind of stuff. It just matters in terms of what does this specific situation call for, and what are the pros and cons and the risks and benefits in that particular situation. Was there anything else to that?
Well, so are you in? That's a scary situation, right?
Yep.
But as a female,
Yep.
I think peeping Tom stalkers,
Yep.
right, are a lot more common.
Yep.
And so if it's a former relationship, if it's a whatever, right,
Right.
and you let your dog out and it's a trained dog,
Yep.
now is your liability higher?
So the general rule is you need to be able to articulate your situation. Your state laws and your county laws are going to have a huge role to play in that. So Florida, where we were based last year, Florida is pretty open to dog bites are only counted against dogs if they're unprovoked. So if somebody's on your property, peeping in your window, that's provoked. If somebody enters your home unwanted, that's provoked, right? Even if somebody like yells at a dog in public or something like that, or provokes the dog and they get bit, then as far as the state laws are concerned, you're not at risk for that. Now, there's always the civil side, right? And these organizations that I mentioned, a lot of them have that civil option where, okay, like there's the you're being charged criminally and we'll defend you. And then there's the you're being sued civilly and we'll defend you. And I always recommend just stack as many things in your favor as you can. If you can, everybody's got limited budget and time, but whatever your budget and time, whatever reasonable amount of that sets you up for success as best you can, the more stuff you can do in that direction, the better. Yes.
If you have a compound that's fenced,
Yep.
What does that change? If somebody comes inside of that fence, but they're not inside your home.
Right. So, and that's it. So an ideal defense, like if you were like, I'm going to build a fortress, right? Where like I'm giving myself the maximum benefit of protection here, is you would have 2 or 3 layers that you would go in. Typically, these would be fenced layers, and you might have a group of dogs that are patrol trained in the outer layer. Now, the risk to those dogs are they can be poisoned, they can be shot, things like that. then you have an inner layer of dogs, then you have the dogs inside the house. Now, the benefit of having just a basic fencing situation like this, even if you're not going to have all those dogs out there, is if I'm going to perimeter train my dog to go out, like we just talked about, to leave the house and go check the area for me, I'm going to primarily have them checking that area closest to the house. And even if I'm going to go out and check myself, I'm going to let the dog do the initial check and alert me if something's out there. Well, if they come back to me and they basically say there's no threat in this area, I know this at least immediate area to my household, there's not somebody here right now. Now I can start checking other things. Do I have thermals? Do I have night vision? Do I have lights I can turn on the property? All of those things would be things that we'd start saying, what do I want to do now to take this next step? Or do I want to just call the cops if it's a normal situation and have them check it for me? Maybe I don't want to go out there in the dark and check that, right? So again, there's no one size fits all every single time, but you can definitely layer your security as you go. And in an ideal situation, you will. It's just, fencing is expensive. And if you're doing multiple layers of fencing going in, that might be something that's too expensive for a lot of people.
What are your thoughts on signage, like security dog on duty, that sort of thing?
In general, I would always recommend protection dog on premises, like do not enter. There's like cuter ones that are like, my dog can make it to the fence in 2.8 seconds. Can you? Right? You put that like on your door or whatever. So a lot of like home insurance companies will require that if you have a dog, you have warnings on your fencing or on your property and things like that. But it's just like putting up a sign that says, I have security cameras. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But if you have a sign that says you have security cameras, at the very least, it's like, well, do the neighbors have security cameras? Let's go check over there. They don't have security cameras. Okay, maybe we'll pick them instead of you, right? So it's more a deterrent. But again, anything we can stack in our favor to bring to make ourselves a harder target to start with is beneficial and makes us less likely that we'll be the ones that are attacked. Anybody else? Well, thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate you being here. We are right behind us with all the Fortress K9 signs and banners and everything. We'd love to talk with you if you guys have any further questions. And is it 3 or 3:30? I think it's 3:30. Okay, so I talked to Nicole. We're going to literally do our demo right behind this tent, right there in front of our stuff. So if you guys want to gather together there at 3:30 and watch us deploy our dogs on guys and do some bite work and all that kind of fun stuff, we'll be right back there. And I'd be happy to chat with you guys and answer any other questions you have.
All right, everybody, give it up for Joe Ryals, Fortress K9, and his good boy. Thanks, sir. All right, the next items up on the agenda. The next class will be up here at 2:45. That's going to be Caroline Blackwell, and she's going to be talking about checking or opting out of the pharmaceutical system. Until then, we do have a cheese making demo from Grumpy Acres. They are the food booth just down the hill against the water, straight down the street. So if you want to see any making, anything that they're going to do down there for cheese making, that's where it's going to be. And then back here for Caroline Blackwell. Until then, please tip your waiters and waitresses, buy some tickets, and go hang out with the vendors. Thank you very much.